The dust from the stagecoach still hung in the air like a copper veil when Clara Murphy stumbled into Tulsa, Oklahoma territory, clutching her throat where her mother's locket used to rest, tears streaming down her sun-reddened cheeks as she realized the one thing that connected her to her dead parents was gone. It was the summer of 1889, and the land rush had brought all manner of people to this part of the territory. Clara had arrived 3 weeks ago with her aunt's family, but Aunt Beatrice had succumbed to fever just days after they'd settled into the boarding house on Main Street. Now Clara was alone, 18 years old, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the desperate hope that someone in this dusty frontier town might have seen her precious locket. She'd noticed it missing that morning when she'd reached up to touch it, a habit she'd developed since her mother died giving birth to her and her father had followed when she was only 15. The locket contained the only images she had of them, tiny painted portraits no bigger than her thumbnail. Without it, she feared she might forget their faces entirely. The main street of Tulsa was crowded with people going about their business. Wagons rolled past kicking up more dust. Men in worn hats tipped them at her as they passed, and women in practical calico dresses hurried along with baskets on their arms. Clara stood in the middle of it all, feeling lost and small. She approached the nearest person, a woman carrying a bolt of fabric. "Excuse me, madam," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Have you seen a locket? It's gold about this big with a tiny clasp shaped like a rose." The woman shook her head sympathetically. "I'm sorry, dear. I haven't seen anything like that. You might try the general store. Sometimes people turn in lost items there." Clara thanked her and made her way down the wooden sidewalk to Hendrick's General Store. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the proprietor, a balding man with spectacles, looked up from his ledger. "Mr. Hendricks," Clara said, approaching the counter. "I've lost something very precious to me, a gold locket with rose clasps. Has anyone turned in something like that?" Mr. Hendricks rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Can't say that they have, Miss Murphy. When did you lose it?" "I'm not sure exactly. I had it yesterday evening, but this morning it was gone. I've retraced my steps from the boarding house to here, but I haven't found it anywhere." "Well, I'll keep an eye out," Mr. Hendricks said kindly. "If anyone brings it in, I'll send word to you at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house." Clara thanked him and left, but the heavy weight in her chest hadn't lifted. She spent the next 2 hours going from shop to shop, asking everyone she encountered. The blacksmith hadn't seen it. Neither had the seamstress, the banker, or the workers at the telegraph office. With each negative response, Clara felt herself growing more desperate. She was standing outside the saloon, debating whether it would be proper for her to enter and inquire there, when a deep voice behind her said, "You look like you've lost something more valuable than money." Clara turned to find herself looking up at one of the tallest men she'd ever seen. He had to be at least 6 feet 3 inches, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty work shirt. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and fell just past his collar. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking gray blue like storm clouds over the prairie. He held his hat in his hands, and there was genuine concern in his expression. "I have," Clara said, surprised by how easily she answered him. "A locket. It was my mother's." "I'm Zachary Quinn," the man said, extending his hand. "I own a ranch about 5 miles west of town. I came in this morning for supplies, and I've been keeping my eyes open." "What does this locket look like?" Clara described it again, noting how Zachary listened intently, his gray-blue eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "I haven't seen it yet," he admitted, and Clara's heart sank. "But I'd like to help you look for it if you'll allow me. Where all have you been in the past day?" "That's very kind of you, Mr. Quinn, but I couldn't impose on your time," Clara said, though she desperately wanted to accept his offer. It's no imposition, Zachary said firmly. And please call me Zachary. Now let's think about this logically. You said you had it last evening. Where were you then? Clara thought back. I was at the boarding house until about 6, then I walked to the church for the evening service. The church is on the north end of town, correct? Zachary asked. When Clara nodded, he continued, and after the service. I walked back to the boarding house, but I stopped at the creek on the way. There's a spot where some willows grow, and I like to sit there sometimes in the evening when it's cooler. Something flickered in Zachary's eyes. The creek. That's a good place to start. The clasp might have come loose while you were sitting there. Show me where. Clara hesitated for only a moment before nodding. There was something trustworthy about Zachary Quinn, something solid and dependable that made her feel safe despite having just met him. She led him down Main Street and then turned onto a smaller path that led toward the creek that ran along the eastern edge of town. As they walked, Zachary said, "I'm sorry about your aunt. Mrs. Patterson mentioned what happened when I saw her at church last Sunday." "Thank you," Clara said quietly. "She was my last living relative. Now I'm trying to figure out what to do next." "You have any plans?" Clara shook her head. "Not really. I have a little money that Aunt Beatrice left me, enough to pay for my room at the boarding house for another month or two. I've been thinking about finding work, but I'm not sure what kind. I can sew reasonably well, and I know my letters and numbers." "Those are valuable skills out here," Zachary said. "I'm sure you'll find something." They reached the creek, and Clara led him to the spot where she'd sat the previous evening. Willow branches hung down like green curtains, and the water burbled peacefully over smooth stones. It was a lovely, quiet place, and Clara had found solace there in the difficult weeks since her aunt's death. "I sat right there," Clara said, pointing to a flat rock near the water's edge. Zachary immediately began searching the area, his eyes scanning the ground methodically. Clara joined him, pushing aside grass and looking under the willow branches. They searched in widening circles, but after 20 minutes, they'd found nothing but rocks and twigs. "It's not here," Clara said, her voice breaking. She sat down heavily on the rock, fighting back tears. "It's really gone." Zachary sat down beside her, and Clara was struck by how natural it felt to have him there. "Don't give up yet," he said gently. "We've only searched one place. You said you walked from here back to the boarding house. Let's follow that path." "You've already given me so much of your time," Clara protested. "I have nowhere else I need to be," Zachary said, and there was something in his voice that made Clara look at him more closely. His expression was open, honest, and there was a warmth in his eyes that made her chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with her missing locket. They walked back toward town together, both of them keeping their eyes on the ground. The afternoon sun beat down on them, and Clara was grateful for the bonnet that shaded her face. Zachary had put his hat back on, and it cast his features in shadow. "Have you lived in Tulsa long?" Clara asked as they walked. "About 3 years," Zachary replied. "I came out here from Missouri after my parents died. They left me enough money to buy land and start a ranch. It's been hard work, but it's starting to pay off." "What kind of ranch?" "Cattle mostly, and some horses." "I have about 200 head of cattle now, and I'm hoping to increase that number next year. I have 2 men who work for me, good men who know the land." "It must be satisfying," Clara said, "building something of your own." "It is," Zachary agreed, "though it can be lonely sometimes." "The ranch is beautiful, especially in the early morning when the sun comes up over the hills, but there's no one to share it with." Clara felt her cheeks warm at the implication in his words. She snuck a glance at him and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. They continued searching as they walked, but by the time they reached the boarding house, They still hadn't found the locket. Clara felt exhaustion washing over her, a combination of physical tiredness from walking in the heat and emotional weariness from the disappointment. "I should let you get back to your errands," Clara said as they stood in front of the boarding house. "Thank you for helping me look. You've been very kind." "I'm not giving up," Zachary said firmly. "I'll ask around town, talk to people, see if anyone's seen it. And I'll come back tomorrow to help you search more if you'd like." "You do that?" Clara asked, surprised. "I would," Zachary said simply. He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he just put his hat back on and nodded to her. "I'll see you tomorrow, Miss Murphy." "Clara," she said impulsively. "Please call me Clara." A smile transformed Zachary's face, making him look younger and more approachable. "Then I'll see you tomorrow, Clara." Clara watched him walk back down the street, his long strides eating up the distance quickly. She touched her throat again where the locket should have been. But for the first time since she'd noticed it missing, the ache wasn't quite so sharp. That evening, Clara lay in her small room at the boarding house and thought about Zachary Quinn. She barely knew him, but there was something about him that drew her. Perhaps it was the kindness he'd shown, or the way he'd listened to her so intently. Or perhaps it was something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. The next morning, Clara woke early and dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She braided her honey-colored hair and pinned it up, then went downstairs for breakfast. Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house proprietor, was setting out biscuits and gravy when Clara entered the dining room. "You look nice today, dear," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "Expecting company?" Clara felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Quinn, the rancher, offered to help me look for my locket again today." "Ah, Zachary Quinn," Mrs. Patterson said, her smile widening. "He's a good man, that one. Honest and hardworking. Been trying to build up his ranch these past few years. Doesn't come into town much, so it's interesting that he's making time to help you." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just focused on her breakfast. But her heart was beating a little faster at the thought of seeing Zachary again. He arrived shortly after 9, looking freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. "Morning, Clara," he said, removing his hat. "I've been thinking about where else you might have lost the locket. Did you go anywhere else yesterday besides the church and the creek?" Clara thought carefully. "I went to the general store in the morning to buy some thread, and I walked past the schoolhouse on my way to church." "Let's start with the path to the schoolhouse then," Zachary suggested. They spent the morning retracing Clara's steps from the previous day. Zachary was patient and thorough, searching every inch of ground carefully. As they walked, they talked, and Clara found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone else. She told him about her childhood in Arkansas, about how her father had been a schoolteacher and had educated her himself. She told him about the books she loved to read, and how she'd always dreamed of seeing the frontier. She even told him about the loneliness she'd felt since her aunt died, how she felt adrift without family to anchor her. Zachary listened to all of it, occasionally asking questions but mostly just letting her talk. In turn, he told her about his own life. He'd been the youngest of 4 children, the only one to survive past childhood. His parents had doted on him, but they'd also instilled in him a strong work ethic and a sense of responsibility. "I promised my father before he died that I'd make something of myself," Zachary said as they walked past the schoolhouse. "That I'd build a legacy worth leaving to my own children someday." "And you have," Clara said. "You own land, you have a successful ranch. Your father would be proud." Zachary looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "I hope so. But sometimes I wonder what the point is, building all of this, if there's no one to share it with. A ranch is just land and cattle without a family to make it a home. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The way he was looking at her made it clear he wasn't just speaking in general terms. But they'd only known each other for a day. Surely he couldn't be suggesting what she thought he was suggesting. They reached the church, a simple white building with a tall steeple. "Did you go inside?" Zachary asked. "Yes, for the service." "Let's check inside then." The church was cool and dim after the brightness outside. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden floors as they walked down the aisle. Clara led Zachary to the pew where she'd sat for the service, about halfway up on the right side. Zachary got down on his hands and knees, checking under the pew and in every crack between the floorboards. Clara watched him, touched by his dedication. He didn't have to be doing this. He could have said a polite word yesterday and gone about his business. But instead, he was here, searching just as hard as she was for something that meant nothing to him but everything to her. After 10 minutes of searching, Zachary sat back on his heels and shook his head. "It's not here either." Clara felt tears pricking at her eyes again. "Maybe it's truly lost," she said quietly. "Maybe I need to accept that." Zachary stood and came to her, and before Clara knew what was happening, he'd taken her hand in his. His hand was large and calloused from hard work, but his touch was gentle. "We haven't searched everywhere yet," he said. "Don't give up hope." "You're very kind to care so much," Clara said, looking up at him. "But why? Why are you spending all this time helping me when we barely know each other?" Zachary was quiet for a moment, as if considering his words carefully. "Because from the moment I saw you yesterday, standing outside the saloon looking so lost and sad, I knew I wanted to help you. And because the more time I spend with you, the more I want to keep spending time with you. I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but I'm not a man who plays games or hides what he's feeling. I like you, Clara Murphy. I like you very much." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Zachary must be able to hear it. "I like you too," she whispered. Zachary smiled, that wonderful transforming smile that made his whole face light up. He squeezed her hand gently and then released it. "Come on," he said. "Let's keep looking." They left the church and continued searching, but as the afternoon wore on with no sign of the locket, Clara felt her hope fading. They were standing on Main Street, trying to decide where to look next when a young boy came running up to them. "Mr. Quinn," the boy called. He was maybe 10 years old with red hair and freckles. "Mr. Quinn, Tom sent me to find you. There's a problem with the fence on the north pasture. Some of the cattle got out." Zachary's face grew serious. "How many?" Tom said maybe a dozen. Zachary looked torn. He turned to Clara, apology written all over his face. "I'm sorry I have to go deal with this." "Of course," Clara said quickly. "Your ranch is your livelihood. Go." "I'll come back as soon as I can," Zachary promised. "Tomorrow, if not sooner." He hurried off with the boy, and Clara watched him go with mixed feelings. She was disappointed that their search had to end, but she was also warmed by his obvious reluctance to leave her. She spent the rest of the afternoon searching on her own, but her heart wasn't in it. Every shop she entered, every person she asked, gave her the same answer. No one had seen her locket. As the sun began to set, Clara made her way back to the creek. She sat on the same rock where she'd sat 2 evenings ago, when she'd still had her mother's locket around her neck, and let herself cry. She cried for her parents, dead so long now that their faces were fading from her memory. She cried for her aunt, gone too soon. And she cried for the locket, the last physical connection she'd had to the family she'd lost. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered to the wind. "I'm sorry I lost it." The creek burbled its response, uncaring of human sorrows. Clara sat there until the light faded and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Finally, She wiped her eyes and stood to go back to the boarding house. As she turned, something caught her eye. A glint of gold in the fading light, just barely visible under the edge of a rock she hadn't moved before. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. She dropped to her knees and reached for it, her fingers trembling. But it wasn't her locket. It was just a brass button, probably fallen from someone's coat. Clara sat back on her heels, the disappointment so sharp it was almost physical pain. That night, she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about Zachary and the way he'd held her hand in the church. She thought about how he'd looked at her, like she was something precious and worth caring about. And she thought about how strange it was that in losing her locket, she might have found something, or someone, who could help fill the emptiness in her heart. The next day was Sunday, and Clara went to church hoping to see Zachary there. But when she scanned the congregation, he was nowhere to be found. She tried to focus on the sermon, but her mind kept wandering. Was he still dealing with his cattle? Had he decided that helping her wasn't worth his time after all? After the service, Clara was walking back to the boarding house when she heard hoofbeats behind her. She turned to see Zachary riding up on a beautiful black horse. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, but he smiled when he saw her. "Clara," he said, dismounting. "I'm sorry I wasn't at church. It took longer to round up the cattle than I expected, and then I had to repair the fence. I only got back to the ranch house a few hours ago." "You should be resting," Clara said, concerned, "not riding back into town." "I wanted to see you," Zachary said simply, "and I wanted to keep helping you search." Clara felt warmth spreading through her chest. "I went back to the creek last night," she said. "I thought maybe I'd missed something." But the locket wasn't there. Zachary studied her face. "You've given up, haven't you?" Clara nodded, feeling tears threatening again. "I think I have to. We've searched everywhere I can think of. If it was going to be found, we would have found it by now." "Maybe," Zachary said slowly. "Or maybe you're not meant to find it." Clara looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" Zachary took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "Clara, I know we've only known each other for 3 days. I know this is going to sound crazy. But in those 3 days, I've come to care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone. You're smart and kind and brave. You've lost so much, but you keep going. You don't complain or feel sorry for yourself. You just keep moving forward." "Zachary," Clara whispered, her heart pounding. "Let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not a rich man, but I have a good ranch and a good reputation. I can provide for a wife and family. I know you don't know me well yet, but I'm asking you to give me a chance. Come out to the ranch. Let me show you what kind of life we could build together. And if after spending some time with me, you decide I'm not what you want, I'll bring you back to town and never bother you again." Clara stared at him, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. "You're asking me to court you?" "I'm asking for a chance to prove that losing your locket, as heartbreaking as it is, might have been the thing that brought us together. That maybe you were meant to lose it so that you'd be standing on Main Street that day when I came into town. So that I'd have the chance to meet you and help you and fall in love with you." "Fall in love with me," Clara repeated, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Zachary said firmly. "I know it's fast. I know it seems impossible, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You're what's been missing from my ranch, Clara. You're what would turn it from just land and cattle into a real home." Clara felt dizzy with emotion. Part of her wanted to tell him he was being ridiculous, that you couldn't fall in love with someone in 3 days. But another part of her, a deeper part, whispered that she felt the same way, that every minute she'd spent with Zachary had felt right in a way that nothing else in her life ever had. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you'll come out to the ranch," Zachary urged. "Today, right now. Let me show you what I'm offering, and then you can decide." Clara made her decision in an instant. "All right," she said. I'll come." The smile that broke across Zachary's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He helped her up onto his horse, then mounted behind her. Clara had never ridden like this before, sitting in front of a man with his arms around her to hold the reins, but it felt safe and thrilling all at once. The ride to Zachary's ranch took about 40 minutes. They rode west out of Tulsa, through rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers. The sky stretched vast and blue overhead, and Clara felt like she could breathe more deeply than she had in weeks. "It's beautiful out here," she said. "Wait until you see the ranch," Zachary said, and she could hear the pride in his voice. When they crested a final hill, Clara gasped. Below them spread a valley with a creek running through it, much larger than the one in town. Green grass covered the valley floor, and cattle grazed peacefully. In the center of it all stood a real house made of wood with a covered porch and glass windows. There were several outbuildings too, including a large barn and what looked like a bunkhouse. "You built all this?" Clara asked. "With help," Zachary said. "Tom and James, my ranch hands, have been invaluable, but yes, this is mine. Or it could be ours if you're willing." They rode down into the valley, and as they got closer, Clara could see more details. The house was well built and maintained, with curtains visible in the windows and flowers planted along the porch. Someone had taken care to make it look like a home, not just a building. Two men emerged from the barn as they approached. One was older, maybe in his 50s, with silver threading through his dark hair. The other was younger, probably in his late 20s, with sandy blonde hair and a ready smile. "Boss," the older man said, nodding at Zachary. "Didn't expect you back so soon." "Tom, James, this is Miss Clara Murphy," Zachary said as he dismounted and then helped Clara down. "Clara, these are my ranch hands. Tom here is the best wrangler in Oklahoma Territory, and James knows more about cattle than anyone I've ever met." "Pleased to meet you, miss," Tom said, tipping his hat. "Real pleased," James added with a grin. "The boss has been talking about you nonstop since yesterday." Zachary shot James a look, but his ranch hand just grinned wider. Clara felt herself blushing. "Let me show you around," Zachary said, offering Clara his arm. He walked her around the property, showing her everything with obvious pride. The barn was well organized, with stalls for the horses and storage for hay and equipment. The cattle looked healthy and well fed. The bunkhouse where Tom and James lived was simple but comfortable. Finally, Zachary led her to the main house. "I built this 2 years ago," he said as they climbed the porch steps. "It's bigger than I need for just me, but I always hoped that someday I'd have a family to fill it." He opened the door and stepped aside to let Clara enter first. The inside was just as impressive as the outside. The main room was large and open, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. There was a kitchen area with a proper stove and a good-sized table. Doors led off to what Clara assumed were bedrooms. "It's wonderful," Clara said honestly. "You've made a real home here, Zachary." "It could be better," Zachary said softly. "It could have a woman's touch, curtains you picked out, dishes you chose, a garden you planted." Children running through the rooms. Clara walked to one of the windows and looked out at the valley. She could picture it so easily, the life Zachary was describing. She could see herself hanging laundry on a line in the sunshine, tending a vegetable garden, cooking meals in that kitchen. She could imagine children, dark-haired like their father, playing in the grass. "I barely know you," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. Zachary came to stand behind her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel his warmth at her back. "Then get to know me," he said. "Stay for dinner. Stay all afternoon. Ask me anything you want to know." Clara turned to face him. They were standing so close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes. "All right," she said. "Tell me everything." They spent the afternoon talking. Zachary made them coffee, apologizing that he didn't have anything fancier to offer, and they sat at the kitchen table while he told her about his life. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about the siblings he'd lost to illness and accident. He told her about his parents' death within months of each other, his father from a bad heart and his mother from grief. He told her about the loneliness of the first year on the ranch, when he'd wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake coming west. But then things started to get better, he said. The ranch started to thrive. Tom and James came to work for me. I made friends in town. I built this house and I was proud of it, but there was still something missing. I'd see families at church, husbands and wives working together, parents with their children, and I'd feel this ache in my chest. I wanted that so badly, but I didn't know how to get it. Why didn't you court someone? Clara asked. Surely there are women in Tulsa who would have been interested. Zachary shook his head. I met a few, but there was never a connection. I couldn't imagine spending my life with any of them. I started to think maybe I was being too particular, that maybe I should just pick someone practical and make the best of it. But I couldn't do it. I kept waiting for something more. And then, Clara prompted. And then, I saw you standing on Main Street looking lost and heartbroken, and it was like something clicked into place. Like all the pieces of my life suddenly made sense, because they'd been leading me to that exact moment, so I could meet you. Clara felt tears welling up, but they were happy tears this time. I felt it too, she admitted. I thought I was going crazy, feeling such a strong connection to someone I'd just met. But every moment I've spent with you has felt right, like this is where I'm supposed to be. Zachary reached across the table and took her hand. So stay, he said. Not forever, not yet, but stay for a while. Let me court you properly. Let's take the time to really get to know each other, and then, when you're ready, if you're ready, marry me and make this place our home. Clara looked down at their joined hands. His was so much larger than hers, rough from work while hers were soft. But they fit together perfectly. She thought about the Locket she'd lost, about the parents she'd never see again, about the aunt who'd brought her west only to die and leave her alone. She thought about all the loss and loneliness she'd experienced in her 18 years, and then she thought about the future she could have with Zachary. A home, a family, a partnership with a good man who already cared for her deeply. It was everything she'd ever wanted, being offered to her by someone who made her heart race and her knees weak. Yes, she said, meeting Zachary's eyes. Yes, I'll stay. The look of pure joy on Zachary's face made Clara's heart soar. He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet, and for a moment they just stood there looking at each other. Then, slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted, Zachary cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and perfect, a kiss full of promise and hope. When they finally pulled apart, Clara was breathless. I'm going to make you so happy, Zachary promised. I swear it. I know, Clara said, and she meant it. They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. Zachary would ride Clara back to the boarding house before dark so that Mrs. Patterson wouldn't worry. Clara would collect her things during the week, and Zachary would arrange for her to stay with a respectable family in town so that they could court properly. He'd come to town every Sunday for church, and as many other days as he could spare from the ranch. They'd take their time, he insisted, do things right. I don't want anyone saying we rushed into this or that I took advantage of you, Zachary said firmly. You deserve to be courted and wooed. You deserve flowers and compliments and time to be absolutely sure about what you're choosing. I'm already sure, Clara said. Then waiting a few months won't matter, Zachary replied. By the time we get married, everyone will know that we chose each other deliberately and with clear heads. As the sun started to sink toward the western horizon, Zachary walked Clara back out to where his horse was waiting. Tom and James came out of the bunkhouse to say goodbye, and Clara noticed them exchanging satisfied glances. The ride back to town was peaceful. Clara leaned back against Zachary's chest, feeling his heartbeat through his shirt. The evening air was cooling, and the grassland was turning gold in the sunset light. "Tell me about your parents," Zachary said as they rode. "What were they like?" Clara was surprised by the question and even more surprised that she wanted to answer it. "My father was gentle," she said. "He loved books and learning. He'd spend hours with me, teaching me to read and write, telling me about history and science and literature. He made everything interesting." "And your mother?" "I don't remember her," Clara admitted. "She died when I was born, but my father told me about her. He said she was beautiful and brave and that she sang all the time. He said she wanted me more than anything, and that even though her death was so tragic, she would have said I was worth it." "I'm sure you were," Zachary said softly. "I'm sure you are. My father never remarried," Clara continued. "He loved my mother too much. He always wore his wedding ring, even years after she died. And he kept her locket, the one he gave me before he died. He said it was the most precious thing he owned because it reminded him of her." "The locket you lost," Zachary said. "Yes." Clara felt the familiar ache in her chest. "I wish I still had it. I wish I had something of theirs to keep." "You have something better than an object," Zachary said. "You have their love. Your mother loved you enough to give her life for you. Your father loved you enough to dedicate his life to raising you well. That love is still part of you. You carry it with you always, locket or no locket." Clara felt tears on her cheeks. "That's a beautiful thought." "It's also true," Zachary said. "And someday when we have children, you'll pass that love on to them. Your parents' legacy will continue through you, through our family." Clara turned her head to look up at him. "You really want children?" "At least half a dozen," Zachary said with a smile. "This ranch needs to be full of life and laughter." "Half a dozen," Clara repeated, laughing. "That's quite a lot." "All right, we'll negotiate," Zachary said, "but definitely more than one or two. I was an only child by the time I was 10 and it was lonely. I want our children to have siblings, to have family." "I'd like that too," Clara said softly. They reached Tulsa as the last light was fading from the sky. Zachary helped Clara down from the horse in front of the boarding house, and Mrs. Patterson came bustling out onto the porch. "There you are, dear," she called. "I was starting to worry." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson," Clara said. "I was out at Mr. Quinn's ranch." Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened slightly, and she looked between Clara and Zachary with interest. "Is that so?" "Yes, madam," Zachary said respectfully. "And I'd like your permission to court Miss Murphy properly. I'll be coming to town regularly to call on her, and I hope you'll allow us to sit on your porch or walk together under appropriate supervision." Mrs. Patterson beamed. "Well, of course, Mr. Quinn. I'd be happy to chaperone. Clara is a dear girl, and she deserves a good man. From what I know of you, you fit that description." "I'll do my best to live up to it," Zachary said. He turned to Clara and took her hand, raising it to his lips for a kiss that was proper but still made Clara's heart flutter. "I'll see you Tuesday," he said. "I have to take some cattle to market tomorrow, but I'll be back the day after." "Tuesday," Clara agreed. She watched him ride away, then turned to find Mrs. Patterson watching her with a knowing smile. "Come inside, dear," the older woman said. "You can tell me all about it over some tea." Over the next few weeks, Zachary courted Clara properly. He came to town every few days, bringing her flowers from the prairie, taking her for chaperoned walks, sitting with her on Mrs. Patterson's porch while they talked for hours. He brought her a book of poetry, knowing she loved to read. He took her to a church social and danced with her, making it clear to everyone in town that Clara Murphy was being courted by Zachary Quinn. Clara felt herself falling more in love with him every day. She loved the way he listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered. She loved how hard he worked, how dedicated he was to making his ranch successful. She loved his kindness to others, the way he tipped his hat to every lady he passed, and always had a friendly word for everyone. She also came to know Tom and James better, as Zachary sometimes brought them along when he came to town. Tom was quieter, more reserved, but he had a dry sense of humor that made Clara laugh. James was outgoing and friendly, always ready with a joke or a story. Both of them clearly respected Zachary, and that made Clara respect him even more. 6 weeks after she'd first met Zachary, Clara finally admitted to herself that she no longer thought about her lost locket every day. The ache of losing it had faded, replaced by the joy of her growing relationship with Zachary. She would always treasure her parents' memory, but she was learning to look forward instead of backward. One Sunday after church, Zachary asked if he could speak to her privately. Mrs. Patterson ushered them into the boarding house parlor, then stationed herself in a chair by the window with her needlework, providing supervision while giving them some privacy. Zachary took Clara's hands in his. "I know we said we'd take our time," he began. "But Clara, these past 6 weeks have been the happiest of my life. Every day I'm not with you feels empty. Every night I go to sleep thinking about you, and every morning I wake up wishing you were there. I don't want to wait anymore." Clara's heart was racing. "What are you saying?" Zachary got down on one knee, and Clara heard Mrs. Patterson gasp softly from her chair. "I'm saying that I love you, Clara Murphy. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, building a home with you, raising children with you. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Clara's face as she nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Zachary, I'll marry you. I love you too. I love you so much." Zachary stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. Clara could feel his heart pounding against her chest, matching the rhythm of her own. When he finally released her enough to look into her face, she saw that his eyes were wet too. "I'll make you so happy," he promised again. "You already do," Clara said. Mrs. Patterson came over, beaming and dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "Oh, this is wonderful news. When will the wedding be?" Zachary looked at Clara. "As soon as possible," he suggested hopefully. Clara laughed. "We'll need at least a few weeks to prepare. I'll need a dress, and we should give people notice." 3 weeks, Zachary said. "I don't think I can wait longer than 3 weeks." 3 weeks then, Clara agreed. The next 3 weeks flew by in a flurry of preparations. Clara sewed herself a wedding dress with help from several ladies in town who had taken her under their wing. It was simple but beautiful, made of cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Patterson insisted on hosting a small reception at the boarding house after the ceremony. Zachary came to town every day, helping with preparations and spending every moment he could with Clara. They talked about their future, making plans for the ranch and their life together. Zachary wanted to expand the house, adding more bedrooms for the children they hoped to have. Clara wanted to start a garden and maybe get some chickens. "I've never been so happy," Clara told Mrs. Patterson one evening as they worked on wedding preparations. "You deserve this happiness, dear," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "You've been through so much loss. It's time for you to have some joy." The night before the wedding, Clara stood at the window of her room and looked out at the stars. She thought about her parents, wishing they could be there to see her married. She thought about her aunt, gone too soon. And she thought about the locket, that precious object she'd lost that had somehow led her to something even more precious. "Thank you," she whispered to the night sky, to her parents, to God, to fate, to whatever force had brought her and Zachary together. "Thank you for bringing me to him." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with a bright blue sky and a gentle breeze. Clara woke early, too excited to sleep. Mrs. Patterson brought her breakfast in bed, but Clara was too nervous to eat much. "Save your appetite for the reception," Mrs. Patterson said with a smile. "I've made quite a spread." Several of the ladies from town came over to help Clara get ready. They did her hair, pinning it up with small flowers woven through the braids. They helped her into her dress, exclaiming over how beautiful she looked. Clara looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the glowing, happy woman looking back at her. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the church. As Clara walked down the aisle on Mr. Hendrick's arm, who had kindly offered to give her away, she only had eyes for Zachary. He stood at the front of the church wearing his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, looking more handsome than she'd ever seen him. When he saw her, his face lit up with such love and joy that Clara felt her heart might burst. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They exchanged vows before God and the gathered community, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife and told Zachary he could kiss his bride, the kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise. The reception at the boarding house was lovely. Mrs. Patterson had outdone herself with the food, and it seemed like everyone in town had come to wish them well. Tom and James were there, grinning broadly and congratulating Zachary on his good fortune. Even the pastor stayed for a while, enjoying the celebration. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to set, Zachary leaned close to Clara and whispered, "Are you ready to go home, home?" Clara loved the sound of that. "Yes," she said, "let's go home." They said their goodbyes and thank yous, accepting hugs and well wishes from everyone. Zachary had brought the wagon to town instead of riding his horse, and he'd filled the back with Clara's belongings from the boarding house. He helped Clara up onto the seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rolled out of town, Clara looked back one last time at Tulsa, the place where she'd arrived lost and alone just a few months ago. It felt like a lifetime ago. She was a different person now, no longer alone, no longer lost. The ride to the ranch was peaceful. The evening air was warm and the grassland was golden in the sunset light. Clara leaned against Zachary's shoulder, and he draped his arm around her, holding her close as they rode. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked after a while. "About how strange life is," Clara said. "A few months ago, I was so devastated about losing my mother's locket. I thought it was the worst thing that could happen to me. But if I hadn't lost it, I wouldn't have been standing on Main Street that day asking everyone if they'd seen it. I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't be here right now, married to the most wonderful man in the world, heading to my new home." "I've thought about that too," Zachary said. "Sometimes I wonder if you were meant to lose it, if it was supposed to happen so that our paths would cross." "Maybe," Clara said. "Or maybe it's just that sometimes good things can come from bad things. Sometimes loss can lead to finding something even better." When they reached the ranch, Zachary pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. But before he helped Clara down, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. "I have a wedding present for you," he said. He opened his hand, and Clara gasped. There, gleaming in the last light of the setting sun, was a locket. It was gold, beautifully crafted with a delicate rose pattern engraved on the front. "Zachary," Clara breathed, tears filling her eyes. "I know it's not the same as your mother's locket," Zachary said quickly. "Nothing could replace that. But I wanted you to have something to put pictures in, something to remember the people you love. I had it made special by the jeweler in town. Look inside." With trembling fingers, Clara opened the locket. Inside were two small spaces for photographs, but one of them already contained a picture. It was a photograph of Zachary, obviously recent, looking handsome and serious. "I thought you could put your picture in the other side," Zachary explained. "And as our family grows, we'll get more lockets and fill them with pictures of our children and grandchildren. We'll create new memories, new treasures." Clara threw her arms around Zachary's neck, crying and laughing at the same time. "It's perfect," she said. "You're perfect. I love you so much." "I love you too," Zachary said, holding her tight. "More than words can say." He helped her down from the wagon and then, to Clara's surprise, he swept her up in his arms. "I'm carrying my wife across the threshold of our home," he said with a grin. Clara laughed as he carried her into the house. He set her down gently in the main room, and Clara looked around with new eyes. This was her home now. Their home. The beginning of their life together. That night, as Clara lay in Zachary's arms in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives, she felt a peace and happiness she'd never known before. She touched the new locket around her neck, feeling its weight, so similar to the old one but also different. Better, perhaps, because it represented not the past but the future. "Are you happy?" Zachary asked softly, his hand gently stroking her hair. "Happier than I ever dreamed I could be," Clara answered honestly. "Good," Zachary said, "because I plan to spend every day making you even happier." And he did. The first years of their marriage were filled with hard work and simple joys. Clara threw herself into making the ranch house a real home. She sewed curtains for all the windows, planted a large garden that provided vegetables for their table, and started keeping chickens. She learned to cook the hearty meals that Zachary and the ranch hands needed after long days of work. Zachary continued to build up the ranch, increasing their cattle herd and improving the land. He was good to his word about making Clara happy, always thoughtful and loving, never taking her for granted. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. 10 months after their wedding, Clara gave birth to their first child. She went into labor early in the morning, and Zachary sent James racing into town for the doctor. Tom stayed with them, keeping Zachary calm while Clara labored. It was a long, difficult birth, and there were moments when Zachary feared he might lose her. He paced outside the bedroom door, praying harder than he'd ever prayed in his life, promising God anything if Clara would just be all right. Finally, near sunset, he heard the sound he'd been waiting for, a baby's cry. A moment later, the doctor opened the door, smiling. "You have a son," he said. "And your wife is fine. Tired, but fine. You can come in now." Zachary rushed into the room to find Clara propped up against the pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. When Clara looked up at him, her eyes were shining with tears and joy. "Meet your son," she said softly. Zachary sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. He was small and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right at Zachary. In that moment, Zachary felt his heart expand in a way he hadn't known was possible. This was his son, his and Clara's. A whole new person, a new life, the beginning of the family legacy he'd dreamed of. "He's perfect," Zachary said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're perfect. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for this gift." They named the baby Samuel after Zachary's father. Little Sam was a healthy, happy baby who filled the ranch house with noise and life. Clara took to motherhood naturally, and Zachary was a devoted father, getting up for night feedings and changing diapers without complaint. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Zachary said one night as he rocked Sam to sleep. "Well, two someones, you and him." "Just wait until we have more," Clara said with a smile. "Your heart will just keep expanding." And it did. 2 years after Sam was born, Clara gave birth to twin girls. Lily and Rose. Zachary was beside himself with joy at having daughters, two beautiful little girls with their mother's honey-colored hair and his gray-blue eyes. The ranch house, which had once seemed too big for just him, was now filled with the sounds of children playing and laughing. 3 years after the twins came another boy, whom they named Thomas after Tom, who had become like family to them. And 2 years after that, a girl they named Grace. 5 children in 8 years, and the ranch house was gloriously, chaotically full. Clara often thought about how her life had turned out as she watched her children play in the grass in front of the house. She'd lost so much, her parents, her aunt, even that precious Locket. But she'd gained so much more. A husband who loved her deeply, children who filled her days with purpose and joy, a home that was exactly what she'd always dreamed of. The locket Zachary had given her hung around her neck always. Over the years, they'd filled it with photographs of their family. The pictures changed as they got better cameras and as their family grew, but Clara treasured each one. When Sam was 6 years old, he asked Clara about the locket one day. "What's that, Mama?" he said, pointing to it. "It's a locket," Clara explained. "It holds pictures of people I love." "Like Grandma and Grandpa?" Sam asked. He'd seen the old painted portraits that Clara kept on the mantel, copies that Zachary had commissioned based on her descriptions. "Yes, like them," Clara said. "But also you and your papa and your sisters and brother. Everyone I love is in my heart, and this locket reminds me of that." "Did you always have it?" Sam asked with the curiosity of a child. "No," Clara said. "Your papa gave it to me on our wedding day. It was one of the best gifts I've ever received." "Better than us?" Sam asked, pretending to be offended. Clara laughed and pulled him into her lap. "Nothing is better than you and your siblings. You are the best gifts of all, but the locket is special because it reminds me of how your papa and I found each other." "Tell me the story," Sam demanded. He loved stories, especially ones about his parents. So Clara told him about losing her mother's original locket, about being lost and alone in Tulsa, about how a kind rancher had stopped to help her search for it. She told him about falling in love and getting married and starting a family. "So if you hadn't lost the first locket, you wouldn't have met Papa?" Sam asked, trying to understand. "That's right," Clara said. "Sometimes losing something can lead you to find something even better." As the years passed, the Quinn family continued to thrive. The ranch grew and prospered under Zachary's careful management. The children grew too, each developing their own personalities and interests. Sam was serious and thoughtful, showing an early interest in learning. Lily was outgoing and adventurous, always getting into mischief. Rose was quieter, more artistic, spending hours drawing pictures of the ranch and the animals. Thomas was energetic and fearless, keeping Clara constantly worried about his safety. And little Grace was sweet and gentle, the peacemaker among her siblings. Zachary and Clara grew more in love with each passing year. They still made time for each other despite the chaos of raising 5 children and running a ranch. They'd take walks together in the evenings after the children were in bed, talking about their day and their dreams for the future. They'd steal kisses in the barn when they thought no one was looking, and they'd hold hands under the table during family dinners. "I never get tired of being with you," Zachary told Clara on their 10th wedding anniversary. "Every day with you is a gift." "Even the days when the children are running wild and the cattle break through the fence and the roof leaks?" Clara asked with a laugh. "Especially those days," Zachary said seriously. "Because we face them together. Because at the end of even the worst day, I get to fall asleep next to you. That makes everything worthwhile." When Clara was 32, she found herself expecting again. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and she felt tired and sick much of the time. Zachary worried about her constantly, insisting she rest more and let the older children help with the housework. "I'm fine," Clara assured him. "Women have babies all the time." "Not my wife," Zachary said firmly. "My wife is precious and irreplaceable, and I'm going to make sure she takes care of herself." This time, Clara gave birth to another boy whom they named David. He was a big baby, healthy and strong, and Clara recovered quickly from the birth. With 6 children, the ranch house was bursting at the seams, and Zachary spent that winter building an addition, adding 3 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Tom and James were still with them, now more like uncles to the children than employees. Tom had married a widow from town a few years back, and they had a small house on the edge of the ranch property. James remained a bachelor, claiming he was too set in his ways to marry, but he doted on the Quinn children and was always willing to play with them or tell them stories. The children grew and eventually started attending the school in Tulsa. Clara and Zachary bought a wagon large enough to carry all of them, and either Clara or Zachary would drive them to school each morning and pick them up each afternoon. It was during one of these trips that something wonderful happened. Sam, now 14 and tall like his father, was helping Clara load supplies into the wagon while they waited for the other children to finish their last day of school before summer break. As Sam moved a crate, he called out, "Mama, I found something." Clara turned to see Sam holding up a small object. Even from a distance, she recognized what it was. Her heart began to pound as she hurried over. "Let me see that," she said, holding out her hand. Sam placed the object in her palm and Clara stared down at it in disbelief. It was a locket. A gold locket with tiny clasps shaped like roses. Her mother's locket, the one she'd lost 14 years ago. "Is it yours, Mama?" Sam asked, seeing the expression on her face. "It was," Clara said, her voice shaking. "I lost it a long time ago, before you were born. Before your father and I were married." "Where did you find it?" Clara asked. "It was wedged in a crack in the sidewalk, right there," Sam pointed. "I only noticed it because the sun hit it just right." Clara opened the locket with trembling fingers. The painted portraits of her parents were still inside, a bit faded but still recognizable. Tears began to stream down her face as she looked at their faces, faces she'd thought she'd never see again. The other children came running out of the school then, full of excitement about summer vacation. They saw their mother crying and immediately became concerned. "Mama, what's wrong?" Lily asked, putting her hand on Clara's arm. "Nothing's wrong," Clara said, smiling through her tears. "Something wonderful just happened. Sam found something I lost a long time ago." She showed them the locket, explaining what it was and why it was so important to her. The children passed it around carefully, looking at the pictures of grandparents they'd never met. "This is amazing," Rose said softly. "It's like they wanted to come back to you." "Maybe they did," Clara said. "Or maybe it was just time for me to have it back." When they got home, Clara couldn't wait to show Zachary. He was out mending a fence when they arrived, and Clara left the older children to watch the younger ones while she hurried out to find him. "Zachary," she called as she approached. "You'll never believe what happened." He turned, taking in her excited expression and the way she was clutching something in her hand. "What is it?" Clara opened her hand to show him the locket. "Sam found it. In town, wedged in a crack in the sidewalk. After all these years, it came back to me." Zachary stared at the locket, then at Clara. "That's incredible," he said. "What are the chances?" "I know," Clara said. "I never thought I'd see it again. I'd made my peace with losing it, but here it is." Zachary pulled her into his arms. "Are you happy?" Clara thought about the question. She looked at the locket in her hand, then up at the man she loved more than life itself. "I'm grateful to have it back," she said slowly. "It means a lot to me. But you know what? The loss of this locket brought me to you, and I wouldn't change that for anything. If I had to choose between never losing it and never meeting you, I'd choose you every single time." Zachary kissed her forehead. "What will you do with it now?" "I'll keep it," Clara said. "And someday, when I'm gone, I'll give it to one of our daughters. But I'll keep wearing your locket every day. Because while this one represents my past, yours represents my present and my future." That evening, after the children were in bed, Clara sat with both lockets in her hands. She looked at the old one, with its portraits of her parents, and felt grateful for the life they'd given her, however brief. She looked at the new one, filled with pictures of her husband and children, and felt grateful for the life she'd built. She thought about the girl she'd been 14 years ago, lost and alone in a strange town, heartbroken over a lost locket. She'd been so sure that nothing could ever make up for that loss. But she'd been wrong. She'd found something, someone, so much more precious than any object could ever be. Zachary came into the bedroom and saw her sitting there with both lockets. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting beside her. "About how blessed I am," Clara said simply. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best things. About how grateful I am that I lost that locket all those years ago because it led me straight to you. And I'm grateful that I happened to be in town that day," Zachary said. "That I saw you and decided to help, that you gave me a chance. It was the easiest decision I ever made," Clara said. She put the old locket in her jewelry box where it would be safe and fastened Zachary's locket around her neck. Then she turned to her husband, the love of her life, the man who had given her everything she'd ever dreamed of and more. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Zachary replied. Always and forever. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. There were hard years when the cattle market was bad or when drought threatened the ranch. There were sad times when loved ones died, Tom passing peacefully in his sleep when he was 70, and later James, killed in an accident with a skittish horse. But there were far more good times than bad. They celebrated as each of their children grew up and found their own paths in life. Sam became a teacher like his grandfather, opening a school in Tulsa. Lily married a neighboring rancher and had 5 children of her own. Rose moved to Kansas City to study art, scandalizing some of the neighbors but making her parents proud. Thomas took over running the ranch with his father, showing the same dedication and skill that Zachary had. Grace became a nurse, dedicating her life to helping others. And David, the baby, surprised everyone by becoming a minister. Clara and Zachary became grandparents, then great-grandparents. Their house was always full of family, especially during holidays and celebrations. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, with David often visiting between his ministerial duties and Lily's family, just a short ride away. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were now over 30 people in attendance, children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. They set up tables outside under the trees, and Clara looked around at all the faces, all the lives that had come from her union with Zachary. "What a blessing," she said to Zachary as they sat together, his arm around her shoulders. "Look at all of this, our family. Our legacy," Zachary agreed. His hair was white now, and his face was lined with years of sun and wind, but his gray-blue eyes were the same as they'd been the day she met him. "Everything I dreamed of and more." "Do you remember that day I asked if you'd seen my locket?" Clara asked. She was 62 now, her honey-colored hair streaked with silver, but she still felt like that 18-year-old girl when she looked at her husband. "I remember everything about that day," Zachary said. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, even with tears on your face. I remember wanting to help you, to make you smile. I remember falling in love with you right there on Main Street in Tulsa." "I fell in love with you too," Clara said. "So fast it scared me. But it was the truest thing I've ever felt." Sam, now 40, stood up and called for everyone's attention. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, raising his glass, "to my parents who have shown all of us what love really means, who built this ranch and this family from nothing, who have loved each other faithfully for 40 years. May we all be so blessed in our own marriages." Everyone raised their glasses and drank, and Clara felt tears in her eyes. Zachary squeezed her hand and leaned close to whisper in her ear. 40 more years wouldn't be enough," he said. "I'd want forever with you." "Then forever it is," Clara whispered back. Clara wore both lockets that day, the old one and the new one, both precious in different ways. When her youngest granddaughter asked about them, Clara told her the whole story about loss and love and finding unexpected treasures. "So the mean old locket helped you find Grandpa?" the little girl asked. "Not mean," Clara corrected gently. "It was precious." "But yes, losing it led me to your grandfather. Sometimes God uses even our losses to bring us to where we're supposed to be." As the sun set on that perfect day, Clara and Zachary stood together looking out over the ranch they'd built. The land stretched out before them, green and prosperous. The house behind them was filled with the sounds of their family, multiple generations come together to celebrate their love. "No regrets?" Zachary asked. "Not a single one," Clara said. "I'd do it all again exactly the same way, even losing the locket." "Especially losing the locket," Clara said firmly, "because it brought me to you, and you've given me the most wonderful life imaginable." They stood there together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The ranch that had started as just land and cattle had become a home, filled with love and family and memories. Clara thought about that frightened, grieving girl who had stumbled into Tulsa so many years ago, desperate and alone. She thought about the rancher who had stopped to help her, who had seen past her tears to the woman beneath. She thought about all the years they'd shared, the children they'd raised, the life they'd built together. The locket around her neck, the one Zachary had given her, felt warm against her skin. It held pictures of their children and grandchildren, tangible evidence of the love that had grown from such a simple beginning. The other locket, her mother's, was safely stored in her jewelry box, a connection to her past that she treasured but no longer needed the way she once had. "Thank you," she said to Zachary, turning to face him, "for stopping that day, for helping me search, for seeing me and loving me and giving me all of this." "Thank you," Zachary replied, cupping her face in his hands the same way he had decades ago when he'd kissed her for the first time. "For giving me a chance, for building this life with me, for being my partner and my love and the mother of my children. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Quinn." "And you're the best thing that ever happened to me," Clara said. As they kissed, surrounded by their family and the land they loved, Clara knew that she'd found something far more precious than any locket could ever be. She'd found love, real and lasting and true. She'd found a partner who valued her and cherished her. She'd found a home and a family and a purpose. The locket she'd lost had been precious because of what it represented, a connection to parents she'd loved and lost. But what she'd found in losing it, what she'd built with Zachary over 40 years of marriage, was something that would last far beyond any physical object. Their love had created a family that would continue for generations. Their partnership had built a ranch that would provide for their descendants. Their commitment to each other had shown their children and grandchildren what marriage could and should be. Years later, when Clara was in her 80s, she passed the old locket on to Rose, who had always appreciated its beauty and history. "This belonged to your great-grandmother," Clara told her. "And now I'm passing it on to you. Keep it safe and someday give it to someone you love." Rose held the locket carefully, understanding its significance. "Thank you, Grandma, I'll treasure it. But remember," Clara added, "the locket itself isn't what matters most. It's the love it represents." Never let an object, no matter how precious, become more important than the people in your life. Clara lived to be 89 years old, with Zachary by her side until the very end. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family, she was wearing the locket Zachary had given her on their wedding day. It was buried with her, a symbol of their love that would last for eternity. Zachary lived another 3 years after Clara's death, but everyone said he was never quite the same without her. He'd sit on the porch of the ranch house, looking out over the land they'd worked together, and talk to her as if she were still there. When he finally passed away at 95, his children found comfort in knowing he was reunited with the love of his life. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and later his children's. The house that Zachary had built and Clara had made into a home remained in the family for generations. And the story of how they'd met, of the lost locket that had brought them together, was passed down through the family as a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the greatest blessings. In the end, Clara had been right. She'd lost something precious, but in losing it, she'd found something infinitely more valuable. She'd found love, family, home, and purpose. She'd found a life worth living and a partner worth sharing it with. And that, as she'd told Zachary on that perfect 40th anniversary, was worth more than any locket could ever be. The legacy of Clara and Zachary Quinn lived on not just in their descendants, but in the love story they'd created. It was a story of loss transformed into gain, of loneliness transformed into belonging, of grief transformed into joy. It was a story that proved that sometimes the things we think we can't live without are simply preparing us for the things we truly need. And so the ranch continued, generation after generation, built on the foundation of love that Clara and Zachary had established all those years ago when a lost locket had brought them together and helped them find something far more precious than either of them could have imagined.